Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce someone who has made a remarkable impact both in academia and our community, Professor Emeritus Bill Briggs. Bill spent his career at the University of Denver, shaping minds and inspiring a love for mathematics. He's also the author of the acclaimed Calculus Early Transcendentals, a textbook that continues to guide students through the complexities of calculus. Beyond academics, Bill is an avid rock climber, cyclist, and hiker, and he treasures time with his grandchildren. He's deeply committed to our community, having served on the City Open Space Board of Trustees and the Chautauqua Board, while also volunteering with organizations supporting those experiencing homelessness. He also enjoys gardening and doing some landscaping work with the Chautauqua Park to keep it as beautiful as ever. Let's give a warm welcome to the one and only Bill Briggs.
Okay, right here?
Yeah. Right. Hey, is there any chance, does this have a pointer on it? Well, that's all right, I can't release.
Point to that screen.
Okay, I think we're set to go here. First, it's a pleasure to be here again. I gave a talk probably 5 years ago, and so I think this is a follow-up talk. And what I hope to do in about 15 or 20 minutes, because I really do want to keep it short and leave time for questions and discussion and food fight if that's necessary. What I'd like to do is give you some updates on the gun situation in this country. And the short story is nothing has changed and a lot has changed. And by that I mean that if you stand back and look from a distance, it seems like really in terms of legislation and court decisions that there's sort of still this tension between gun rights people and gun control people. And in that sense, nothing's changed. But if you zoom in on local level, say around for each individual state, you'll see that there has been some movement in both directions. In some states, they've become more permissive of gun rights, and in other states, more restrictive. So I'm going to do my best to give you a very quick introduction. So I want to dispel one misconception right at the start, and that is that in 1791, when the Bill of Rights was ratified, that there was unanimous agreement about having a Second Amendment concerning gun rights, and that everybody agreed on it. That's absolutely not true. There was no sort of founding fathers' wisdom that went into the Second Amendment. There were fights from the very beginning. There were people that supported no Second Amendment. Others supported a very restrictive Second Amendment. Others wanted a free-for-all with respect to guns. And that's sort of where we are today, isn't it? And I can illustrate to you pretty clearly just exactly what the problem is. If you just saw the words, the right of the citizens to keep and bear arms, or the citizens have a right to keep and bear arms, what would you think that meant? Does that sound like every individual can have a gun and pretty much use it anywhere you want? That's right. But what if those words were prefaced by well-regulated militia is necessary for the security of a free state, then the right for the citizens to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So now what does it sound like? Does it still sound like every individual should have a gun and be able to use it, or is it only if they're using it for militia purposes? So, well, now you can see why the interpretation of the Second Amendment gets very tricky, and it's been a difficult situation ever since the Second Amendment was ratified. So there's always that tension between individual rights and the collective rights, meaning you can use gun only for the good of the society, or if you're in a militia or something like that. So anyway, I want to get that sort of straightened out, is that there was never agreement on the Second Amendment from the very beginning. Okay, next slide. Can you, that's what this is for. Which button? Very far right. Thank you. Where do I point it? Okay. Okay, so here's some really quick summary. Okay, I just looked down here, right. Here's some quick summaries that I've updated recently about guns in America. According to polls, and polls are really the only way we get a lot of information about guns, is that about 40% of the households in this country have a gun. And that means about 30% of individuals own a gun. 47% of people who own guns say that the primary reason for owning a gun is self-defense. And it's worth pointing out that the largest group of new gun owners is women. And so it's understandable that self-defense might be a good reason for having a gun. Counting the guns in this country is really difficult because guns are bought, they're sold, they're traded, they're trafficked in, and so it's really hard to keep track. And gun manufacturers are very protective of sales data. But the best estimate is there are about 400 million guns in this country right now, which is more than one gun per person. And that's double the gun rate in the next highest countries in the world. Number of gun deaths is about 46,000 now. And that's about 125 gun deaths per year. And so let's look a little bit more at, okay, I know better than to put a slide like this up that's filled with numbers. I was trying to make a graph, but all you need to do is look at the top line. And this is total, this is gun deaths since 2014. Excluding suicides. So this is homicides, accidental deaths, deaths by officers and so forth, but total gun deaths is across the top line. So you can see that it's increased from about 12,000 to, it's real hard to read that, 18, well the high was 21,000. Another thing that's important to realize is that what we hear about in the press all the time are these mass murders. And those represent an incredibly small percentage of total gun deaths in this country. So you can see those have increased from 17 to about 40. Now on the bottom line, which is really significant, is the total suicide deaths. Deaths by suicides by gun. And you can see the incredible increase from about 21,000 to 23,000 or something like that. And it turns out that deaths by suicide account for about 2/3 of the total gun deaths in this country. And so, thanks partially to the media, everyone is focused on the mass serial killings, or mass killings, serial killings, which are an incredibly small percentage of total gun deaths, whereas suicides is really where a lot of the attention and the resources should be going. Okay, so I want to show you just 3 real quick snapshots of what has happened in the last 5 years. And so things change with respect to guns in 3 ways. There's the courts, there's the federal laws, and there are the state laws. And there's action that's often completely uncoordinated on all 3 of those levels. So the big development in the last 5, well, actually this was, okay, sorry, I got another slide here. This backs up a little bit. So there were 2 significant Supreme Court decisions about guns in 2008 and 2010. And those 2 decisions, which I really won't go into very much, relaxed gun regulations nationwide. The the justices essentially said that the right of law-abiding citizens to use arms in defense of their home shall be allowed, and obscuring the issue somewhat, which Supreme Court decisions often do, Scalia, who wrote the majority opinion, also said, however, the right to keep and bear arms is not a right to keep and carry any weapon anywhere you want for whatever purpose. And that's how the Supreme Court left it for all of the states to decide. And since then, there's been literally thousands and thousands of court cases that have tried to interpret this decision. So here's what I was getting to. 2 years ago, I think, 2022, there was a significant Supreme Court decision that goes by the name Bruin. It really means New York State Rifle and Pistol Association.
In the back if you're not.
Okay, all right, sorry. It's just easier for me to see that than this. So the Bruin decision is New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. Bruin was a sheriff in one of the counties in New York. And this decision overturned a law in New York that was over 100 years old. It also overturned a lower court decision. So New York had a very restrictive policy on guns, that essentially gun possession outside of the home was illegal unless you could show some special purpose, proper cause for having a gun. The Supreme Court decision completely relaxed that and allowed pretty much unrestricted gun possession outside of the home. States may intervene, and mildly anyway, and have some rules for issuing gun permits, but absent those state laws, the Supreme Court said that possession outside of the home is allowed. So there's a lot more to say about this decision, but I just want to keep that brief. Well, here's a couple other points about that decision. The majority opinion is written by Clarence Thomas. For legal scholars, the really important aspect of the Bruin decision is it completely changed the way that states and lower courts interpret gun laws. And not surprisingly, Clarence Thomas is what we call an originalist, which accounts for a majority of the Supreme Court now, tend to look at historical precedents. And so the Bruin decision essentially said that to be constitutional, a gun law must have a strict analog. There must be some precedent in the 19th century in order for a gun law to be constitutional. Yes, you're shaking your head. I understand. Okay, federal legislation. I won't go through all of the history. These are previous federal laws that have been passed over the years, and the point to be made here is that there are very, very few of them. There's very little action on federal gun legislation because it's often left to the states. And so there was just an incredible jungle of state gun laws, often conflicting, contradictory, and so forth. But this is it for federal laws until 2022, was it? Congress somehow got together and did pass what's called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And there are a whole lot of details in this. It's a huge compromise. Gun control people in Congress wanted a much stricter law. Gun control people who were reacting to the lobby didn't want this law at all. But one thing it did do was tighten up significantly background checks in the states, tried to close loopholes due to gun shows and personal sales and so forth. It also gave states resources to enforce what are called red flag laws. Okay, we can move on from there. And then I just want to say a little bit about Colorado laws. As you know, Colorado is one of the few states that has a majority in both houses of the legislature plus a Democratic governor. So in fact, it's relatively easy in this state to pass more restrictive gun laws. That's certainly not the case in a lot of states. But just in the last year, Colorado passed laws restricting the sale or transfer of guns by individuals. It remarkably banned the sale and transfer of assault weapons and what are called bump stocks, which are these devices that convert a sort of a typical assault weapon into essentially a machine gun. There's laws restricting car transport of guns. And it's interesting to know that in this state, open carry of firearms is legal unless it's restricted by local municipalities. I'm going to I have 2 more slides and then I'm going to really quit here. The real question is, what can we do about gun violence in this country? Especially given that people are so deeply divided about gun rights in the first place. And I think one thing that really can be done, has been done to some extent, is to still continue to tighten up background checks. So the goal, at least among gun control people, is to have universal background checks. That means every single transfer of a gun in a licensed gun shop, in personal sales, gun shows, however it happens, a background check is necessary. So that's a long ways off. The irony in all of this is that the majority of NRA members, gun owners, and Americans support tighter background checks. And yet, it's such a challenge to get these laws passed either at the state level or at the federal level. And then finally, I think another remedy that is making headways are these what are called red flag laws. They're also called gun violence restraining orders or extreme risk protection orders. And those allow either relatives or close associates of gun owners to report those people if they feel that those people are a risk to themselves or to others by carrying a gun. And then it goes to a court and it's adjudicated there. Now, these red flag laws exist now in 21 states. Colorado is one of them, and that number is increasing all of the time. So there are a lot of other remedies that we could talk about, but I really did want to wrap it up and leave it open to some questions or discussions. So thanks very much.
Bill, thank you so much for this presentation. I'm just interested in those states that have some level of dying assistance statutes. Or dying assistance statutes where, like Oregon has, I think, a process there, and Colorado has somewhat of a process. Do you know, does that impact the suicide rate in those states? I mean, the suicide by gun rate, I guess, is what I'm wondering. Do you have any idea?
Cindy? I think the answer is I don't know.
Okay, all right. Yeah. It would seem as though it might, but I mean, I'm just blown away at that 2/3 chart that you showed, that 22,000 or whatever it was suicides a year. So anyway, thank you.
There's a question online. Meryl, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Meryl, are you there?
No, you hearing me? Thanks, Bill, for speaking to the club. And Leslie says hi, by the way. My question's historical. Could you comment on how the Remington Corporation, their marketing toward the end of the 19th century affected America's interest in and love for guns?
Thanks for that question. Well, it's interesting. Did you say Remington?
Yeah, the rifle company.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to be very precise about that. I think Colt might have been one of the first companies to really market guns, and those were the handguns. And that was in about 1850 or something like that. But you are correct that the marketing effort for guns, and particularly with Colt, it was sort of the whole lore and the mystique of the Wild West that they were promoting. And that had a huge effect on the sale of guns. So I do know that. Remington with long guns, you're probably thinking, right, rifles?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. My guess is that it was a similar situation, that it was active marketing. And again, you know, it's a hard question to answer, because at that time, states, I'm still talking about the 19th century, say about 1850 or 60, the states all had very different laws about guns. I mean, some were very restrictive, some it was just open carry, free for all, wherever you want. So, you know, gun sales varied across the country as well. So that's not a great answer, but you're right. The marketing of the early gun manufacturers made a huge difference in the sale and possession of guns. Thanks for tuning in, Merrill.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
Bill, I just want to tell everybody, about 20 years ago when I retired, I used your textbook in for the quantitative reasoning and mathematical science.
Okay.
Your textbook is one of the best designed textbooks in any subject that I've ever seen. But my question is a simple one. Do you have any hope that someday we will lose, the United States will lose its commanding leadership position in so many of these areas, gun deaths, so on and so forth? Give me some hope.
Silence. Little hope. You know, I'm trying not to be pessimistic about these things, but I just, you know, I look at the way progress is made in this country, and it's, on guns, I mean, and it's either slow or non-existent. And I just think the tension between, you know, the two extremes is ongoing. I think it's, I really do. I think it's a standoff. This country is unique in a lot of ways in this respect. I mean, there's only 2 other countries in the world that have a Second Amendment, and right now I don't remember, Guatemala and Colombia or something like that. And that's one thing that makes this country unique, is that people can always point to the Second Amendment and argue either way. But typically it's used to argue for additional gun rights. And the other thing is, the situation now is that you can't turn the clock backwards and remove 400 million guns. They're out there. We're never going to have a gun buyback program that's going to really work. So I think we've just come too far. Not to use an old phrase, but the horse is definitely out of the barn. And so I think the best we can do is maintain the standoff. And in some states, you know, there's going to be tighter gun control laws, and that's going to look like progress. But then for every state like Colorado that's making progress, there's 1 or 2 states that are going the other direction. I'm sorry, I wish I could give you hope, but especially at our age, I don't think we're going to see much of a change. It's a bad way to end, so we better have one more question at least.
Yeah, I have a question. So what is the rationale the courts have given for ignoring that preface in the Second Amendment about having a militia? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to read the decisions in these Supreme Court decisions, and actually it's not, my experience anyway, is these decisions are often fairly easy to read and fairly interesting. And when I read them, I see a lot of really convoluted arguments, arguments that are hard to believe. And then what's especially happening back in the McDonald case even, but certainly in the Brune case, is this increased reliance on the historical precedent. Trying to read the early documents and literally and use them today. Now, that doesn't answer your question because you can still argue over what the Second Amendment really means. But the justices seem to find ways to read past the preface in the Second Amendment and go straight to the individual rights piece of it. I mean, one rationale might be, well, we don't even have militias today. I mean, the closest analog that people find is the National Guard, but so they say, well, there's no militias, so, you know, what's left is the individual rights clause. I can't explain it, I really can't. I mean, I read these decisions and I just kind of scratch my head.
How does a person in Colorado sell his guns if he wants to sell guns? An individual?
Do you mean, do you need a background check? Is that what you're asking?
Well, what is the process of, say I wanted to I have some guns and I want to sell them. How do I go about doing that?
Having never done that, I'm not completely sure. I mean, one would be a personal sale. You know, you just sell your gun to a neighbor or even give your gun to a relative or something like that. And in Colorado, I'm not sure if personal sales are actually regulated, meaning if they require a background check or not. I'm sure you can find gun dealers, especially at gun shows, that would buy guns back. And that should be regulated in Colorado. You should need a background check for that. And that's about all I can think of. I just add one more thing. I mean, internet sales are an increasingly popular way to sell guns. So that's the other way, is to go on the internet. And I believe the federal law, that Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, I think that does restrict well, what it does is it requires a background check for internet sales. But you know, you think about, how does that work? I mean, I'm not sure how some of those laws are really going to be enforced.
So thank you for speaking. I do have a question about the statistics. You see a lot of statistics that talk about gun deaths and gun violence associated with suicide or with malicious acts. What we hear from gun rights advocates are that they need guns to defend themselves or their home or their property. Is there a statistic out there that tracks the use of guns in that way?
Yes. Is there any way I can get a slide back up? You could go right to the beginning. I skipped over one statistics there, which gets exactly to your point. Right there, the bottom. So what you're talking about are what people call DGUs, defensive gun uses. And so there are organizations and scholars that try to measure that. How many times is a gun used to prevent some kind of offense? A robbery, a murder, whatever. And I mean, here's where that number gets pretty vague to begin with, is what does it mean to use a gun? So in some counts, if someone just brandishes a gun and an assailant runs away, that's a defensive gun use. In other counts, other methods of counting, you actually have to fire the gun, maybe at someone or up in the air, and then it counts as a defensive gun use. So the counts for DGUs, not surprisingly, are all over the map. And the latest numbers I could find is that it goes anywhere from 80,000 to 2.5 million gun uses per year. And here's why, I mean, the scholars, they argue over this number. I mean, the papers that are written saying I've got a new estimate for DGUs, it's amazing. But the gun control people favor, which way does it go? Yeah, so the gun control people say, no, it's the other way. The gun rights people say, look, the guns have been used 2.5 million times to prevent crimes, so why don't we let everybody have a gun? then the other side, the gun control people say, look, defensive gun uses are a small percentage, so let's continue to restrict guns. So it's an important quantity in terms of the rhetoric in the campaigns. Oh, it's an important quantity, but we really don't have a good way to measure it.
Yeah, I was just curious how effective is enforcement of gun laws? I mean, whatever gun laws we have in Colorado or other states, how well are they enforced?
Oh, boy, that's a huge question. And so there's enforcement at the federal level, there's enforcement at the state level, local level. You know, again, it comes back to that argument between the two sides. The gun rights people say, you know, you're infringing on the rights of people. You're enforcing the gun laws too strictly, so you should back off. The gun control people say we need more money and tighter enforcement. So at the federal level, one of the really key factors is the Bureau of ATF, arms, no, what is it? Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, thank you. That organization is notoriously underfunded. And that's one of the main enforcement mechanisms at the federal level. So a lot of it does come down to just resources and putting officers or agents on the ground. But you'll get different answers to that question. You know, the gun control people will say enforcement's not adequate and it needs to be stepped up.
Great.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks. You had the slide about the percentages of people who support gun control, but the lack of political will to
Right.
make it happen. What correlation do you see in, for one, PAC, political, financial support of certain politicians, political groups, specifically politicians, in the NRA, by those super PACs, and the lack of political will?
To me, that's one of the most startling and troubling facts that I put up here, is that there's this huge disconnect between what the people want and what our legislators actually do in Congress, let's say at the federal level. And the explanation, I think, is fairly simple, is that not a lot, but some legislators are responding not to their constituents, but to the gun lobby. And until recently, the NRA was one of the most powerful lobbies in the country, and they were heavily funded. I think they gave $25 million to Trump's campaign in 2016. So I think that's what's going on. And to me, it's troubling because it's really a lack of representative government. When you have representatives, presumably there to represent their constituents, but they're responding to a highly well-funded outside organization. That's my interpretation.
Thank you. We have a question online. Dominica, would you like to unmute, please?
Yes, good afternoon again. We have a serious concern in the Caribbean region. We are your neighbors to the south. We're kind of fairly close to the United States, especially to Florida. We have, in most of the Caribbean countries, we have pretty strict gun laws, but unfortunately, we have a lot of illegal guns coming in various ways, coming into our countries. And of course, we have, unfortunately, criminals who are using, and gangs and so on, who have access to these guns, which are coming illegally into our countries. Sometimes they're disguised in barrels or boxes containing ordinary household things. Somehow they're getting onto the ships, and it's only when they arrive here that they are discovered whenever we hear about a cache of guns being hidden in a fridge or something, we heave a sigh of relief, and then we wonder how many actually did get through, because there seems to be a never-ending supply of illegal guns. In fact, last year, the leaders of a number of Caribbean countries met in Trinidad and discussed this gun problem that we have, and actually appealed to the US government to try and stem the flow. But I don't think anything has come out of that at all. I'd like your comment on that, please.
Well, I'm not that familiar with import-export laws, but you're right. I mean, the United States produces more guns than any other country by a long shot. And some of those guns can be sold legally into other countries, but I think what you're talking about is illegal gun trafficking.
Yes.
I'm not sure what the answer to that is. And I don't even know if the answer is on the export side or the import side. So even in the so-called host countries that are receiving the guns, it seems like there could be controls on that end. And I don't know how in this country we can restrict illegal trafficking of guns. I mean, I know ATF and FBI are aware that it's happening, but I don't know how strong the enforcement is. But I'd add one more comment that you brought to mind, and that is what you're describing internationally, it happens in the States all the time. So you get a restrictive, gun control favorable state like Colorado, and then right next door, you get a very liberal gun rights state. I'm trying to think what it would be, Wyoming, for instance. And if someone in Colorado can't buy a certain gun, like now an assault weapon can't be bought in Colorado, you drive over the state line, you buy it in Wyoming. And so that's why another reason this situation is so difficult in this country is that you've got 50 states with widely varying laws, often conflicting laws. Some states have reciprocity between them, but that's still not enough. So this situation is happening at the international level, and it's certainly happening within this country. Thanks for the question, though, and sorry for the bad answer.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Bill, because I invited you, I get to have the last word. So, and my name is Constance Holden, for those of you who don't know me, and I want to thank you for coming here today and enlightening us. I heard you about 5 years ago when you spoke. That was actually at the Boulder Valley Rotary. But this is a challenge in our country. It's a huge challenge, and of course, it really hit it close to home when two and a half years ago, we lost 10 of our citizens here in Boulder at the King Soopers shooting. And of course, many of us believe that that was a shooting that was preventable. And Michael Doherty will be speaking to us on January 17th, and he's going to talk about the lessons that our community can take away from that shooting. And I thought it would be helpful for us to hear about the background, the history, why we have guns in this country, and you've done a beautiful job of laying that groundwork for us, Bill. So in your name, in your honor, we have donated 100 doses of polio vaccine. And as you know, Rotary's been working on the polio problem for the last 35 years. And so we're still working on that one too, and we're going to be working on this gun issue. And our Rotary has formed a subcommittee of our Behavioral Wellness Committee, and it's a gun violence prevention subcommittee. And anybody in this room who's interested in helping us, we're looking for members for that group also. But thank you for being here today.
Great, thank you so much, Constance.